I have constituents that have been scattered across Africa on train and equip missions. So just ballpark, in the last decade, how many Africans has the United States military trained and equipped?
Congressman, I don't have that figure. I can get that figure for you.
Ballpark, just, how many?
Congressman, it would be a wild guess right now.
Seems like something we should know, right? Like more than 10,000?
It is more than 10,000.
More than 50,000?
I'd say we're reaching around 50,000 at least.
And what percentage of the people we've trained end up participating in insurrections or coups against their own government?
Very small number, Congressman, very small number.
So what percentage do you think?
I'd say probably less than 1%.
And what data sets do you track to arrive at the conclusion that less than 1% of the roughly 50,000 that we've trained have participated in coups? Because it'd be like about 500, about 1% of 50,000.
Congressman, you may have that information. I don't at this time, but I know.
Well, I know there's some, right? Like go ahead and throw up that image. This is Colonel Mamade Doumbouya, and this is a photo of him. Did we train and equip him? In Guinea?
By name, I cannot identify that.
Well, that guy in the middle with the big red hat, Colonel Mamade Doumbouya, that's him with a bunch of U.S. service members outside of our embassy. And just months after this photo was taken in 2021, he led a coup in Guinea and threw out the leader. Does that concern you?
Congressman?
Okay, well, that's a very telling answer. In Burkina Faso, did we share core values with the leader that we trained there who led a coup?
Hey, Breakdown family. So President Trump is reportedly planning to shut down Africom, its entire military command for Africa. That could mean no more drone bases, no more training programs, no more boots on the ground strategy in the name of counter-terrorism, leaving behind a power vacuum the size of a continent wide open for Russia, China, and whoever else wants a piece of it. Now, it's not official yet, but reports are swirling that Trump's team is actively considering dismantling Africom and folding its operations into U.S. European Command. If this happens, it would mark one of the most significant shifts in U.S.-Africa relations in decades, and a geopolitical reset that could reshape Africa's future for generations to come. And the stakes, massive. Because on one hand, you have people saying, good, Africom has failed Africa. It's time for Africa to reclaim its own security. And on the other, you have critics saying, well, removing Africom now would unleash a new wave of chaos and open the door for China, Russia, or worse, unchecked terror groups. So today on The Breakdown, we're asking, why is Africom on the chopping block? What's really driving this move? Is it about cutting costs, streamlining power, or is it part of a bigger plan to reshape America's global footprint under Trump? And more importantly, has Africom really helped or harmed Africa's security? Because for all the drones, intelligence, and military training is brought to the continent, terrorism hasn't gone down. In fact, it's gotten worse. So the question is, has Africom been a stabilizing force or a symbol of failed foreign policy wrapped in military uniforms? And if the U.S. steps out, who steps in, right? Because make no mistake, power abhors a vacuum. And if the U.S. walks away, yes, you better believe that Russia, China, Turkey, even private military contractors like Wagner are ready to fill the gap. What would that mean? This isn't just about Africom. It's about who controls African security and on whose terms. We're going to break it all down. But before we dive in, a big welcome to all of our new subscribers and members. I'm so glad you're here. And if you're watching and haven't joined us yet, would you help us get to 200,000 subscribers? Because here at Planet Genius TV, we're not just building a channel. We're creating a global home for Black stories that are told with truth, with intention, and with power. And if that matters to you, and I hope it does, then please subscribe and share our channel with your group chats. Let them know this is where real conversations about global Black politics, economics, and power are happening, and they need to be a part of the action. All right, now, let's break it down.
We'll turn our focus to the US's plans to dial back its military presence in Africa now. Speaking at African Lion, the largest joint training exercise on the continent, General Michael Langley urged African nations to take the lead in their own security, calling for greater self-reliance in the face of growing threats. Well, the shift comes as Islamist insurgencies gain ground while Russia and China intensify their push for influence across the region.
So let's start with what we know. Multiple reports have confirmed that President Trump's foreign policy team is actively considering the shutdown, or at least the radical restructuring of Africom, the U.S. Africa Command. The plan? To hold Africom into U.S. European Command, essentially erasing Africa as a standalone strategic theater. Now, on paper, the justification sounds like your typical bureaucratic cleanup, right? Shifting priorities, too much redundancy, not enough efficiency, budget cuts, a shrinking Pentagon. But don't get it twisted. This isn't just a military reshuffle. This is the U.S. signaling that Africa is no longer a priority, at least not in the way it once was. And that's not just speculation. Even General Michael Langley, the commander of Africom, has publicly acknowledged the threat.
There have been recent news reports that the Pentagon is considering combining Africom and EUCOM into one command. For both of you, what is your best military advice on the strategic, operational, and resource implications of such a merger? General Langley?
Senator, I won't speculate on the evolving policy, but I will say this. I'll just give comparison of the relevance of AFRICOM and our mission. Back in 2007, when we were stood up, we looked at the challenges across the globe, and especially the challenge of terrorism. At that time, the global presence of terrorism on the African continent was 2%. Senator, today it's 43%. And then even adding on to a geostrategic type of perspective of our great power competitions, both Russia, Federation, and the Chinese Communist Party activities on the African continent is grand. So my responsibilities are great. So for a combat commander, it would be a daunting task for integration.
So would you agree that General Cavalli, that the challenges, as General Langley put it, have increased in Africa, not decreased, and making it even more important that this combatant command continues?
Ma'am, the challenges in Africa have increased exponentially over the last 10 years. Not just the terrorism that was there during the previous period of the last 20 years, but the increasing activity of Russia and China. Yeah, there are a lot of problems there, ma'am, and I'm satisfied with the problems I have in EUCOM.
Would you like to share your thoughts on yet another potential change being contemplated by the administration, and that is to give up our role as NATO's Supreme Allied Commander?
Yes, ma'am. I think that would bring some challenges in terms of nuclear command and control. It would put us in a position where in an Article 5 situation, we could have, for the first time since the First World War, large numbers of American troops under non-U.S. command. So I think those are things that would have to be considered carefully.
Giving up this command, in fact, could really endanger our national security. That's what I hear you saying. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
At the recently concluded 2025 African Lion Conference, the largest annual military exercise in Africa, General Langley urged African leaders to speak up, to tell Washington directly if Africa still matters to them. Because protecting the homeland is now top priority for the US, not Africa. And on the ground, the timing could not be more interesting. In Somalia, Al-Shabaab is growing bolder. In Niger, the new military leader has kicked out US forces, accusing them of disrespecting national sovereignty. And across the broader Sahel, extremist attacks are surging, while AFRICOM's influence is shrinking. So when we say AFRICOM is on the chopping block, it's not just a theory. It's already happening, both on the continent and now here in the US. And now the rest of the world, including China, Russia, and a newly assertive Africa, is watching to see what happens next.
I am concerned about the northern part of Somalia and ISIS growing in numbers.
How much have they grown in that area?
Oh, wow. They are, in the past year, it's probably grown probably twofold. I won't give numbers, but it's more than what it was last year.
Now you might be thinking, so what if the US pulls back a little, right? Let African countries take care of their own security. Absolutely. But here's why this moment matters, more than it may seem, because this isn't just a military decision. It's a geopolitical power play. One, a real security threat is still very much alive. AFRICOM's presence may be controversial, yes, but the terrorist threats it was created to fight haven't disappeared. Groups like Al-Shabaab in Somalia, ISIS affiliates in the Sahel, Boko Haram in Nigeria are not just headlines. They are still wreaking havoc, destabilizing entire regions, displacing millions, and killing civilians. Whether AFRICOM has been effective or not, its intelligence, support, drone surveillance, training programs, and logistical aid have been a critical layer in countering these groups. Take that away overnight, and you create a massive operational gap. And extremists don't wait for you to catch up. And then you have the rise of the global opportunists. If the US steps out, others will step in, and fast. Russia is already testing the waters with military partnerships and private contractors like Wagner, especially in Central and West Africa. China has been deepening military cooperation with African states, building infrastructure, opening naval bases, and supplying arms. Even Turkey and Iran are beginning to engage more aggressively across North and East Africa. So this isn't just about boots and bases. It's about influence, ideology, and economic leverage. AFRICOM stepping back creates a vacuum, and vacuums don't last long. And the third challenge is that African nations are not fully ready yet. Yes, there's growing consensus across Africa that foreign military dependence needs to end. But here's the problem. Many African states don't yet have the infrastructure, coordination, or funding to secure vast, volatile regions on their own. The AU standby force is still not fully operational. Regional blocs like ECOWAS are facing their own crisis. Domestic military forces are often underfunded and overstretched. So if AFRICOM pulls out without a coordinated transition plan, security could collapse in fragile states, opening the door for more coups, more violence, and more instability. Bottom line, whether you like AFRICOM or not, the stakes are real. This isn't just a change in US military posture. It's a shift in the global balance of power, with Africa at the center. And what happens next will determine who influences the continent's future and who gets left behind.
I have constituents that have been scattered across Africa on train and equip missions. So just ballpark, in the last decade, how many Africans has the United States military trained and equipped?
Congressman, I don't have that figure. I can get that figure for you.
Ballpark, just, how many?
Congressman, it would be a wild guess right now.
Seems like something we should know, right?
Over the years, we have trained a substantial number, especially in the Gulf of Guinea states, but including
Like more than 10,000?
It is more than 10,000.
More than 50,000?
I'd say we're reaching around 50,000
Okay.
at least.
And what percentage of the people we've trained end up participating in insurrections or coups against their own government?
Very small number, Congressman, very small number.
So what percentage do you think?
I'd say probably less than 1%.
But it does happen, right?
The IMET program is in force, and we've pushed a significant number through our schools across the
And what
military
data
infrastructure.
sets do you track to arrive at the conclusion that less than 1% of the roughly 50,000 that we've trained have participated in coups? Because it'd be like about 500, about 1% of 50,000.
Congressman, you may have that information. I don't at this time, but I know.
Well, I know there are some, right? Like go ahead and throw up that image. This is Colonel Mamade Doumbouya, and this is a photo of him. Did we train and equip him? In Guinea?
By name, I cannot identify that.
Well, that guy in the middle with the big red hat, Colonel Mamade Doumbouya, that's him with a bunch of U.S. service members outside of our embassy. And just months after this photo was taken in 2021, he led a coup in Guinea and threw out the leader. Does that concern you?
Congressman, core values is what we start off with in IMA programs.
Do we share
stick to
core
that.
values with Colonel Doumbouya?
Core values. I will repeat that. Core values.
I know,
Respect for humanity.
Do we share those values with Colonel Doumbouya?
Absolutely. In our
do?
curriculum.
He led a coup.
We do.
Okay, well, that's a very telling answer. In Burkina Faso, did we share core values with the leader that we trained there who led a coup?
It's in our curriculum. We
Leading
stress
coups
core
are in our
values.
curriculum?
We request civilian-led governance.
Wait, hold on. Is leading coups in our curriculum?
Absolutely not.
So
Civilian-led,
my
civilian-led.
question is, do we share core values with the coup leader in Burkina Faso?
Now let's get real. Africom was created in 2008 with a bold mission to support African nations in fighting terrorism, improving stability, and promoting peace. But over 15 years later, we have to ask the uncomfortable question. Has Africom actually delivered on that promise or just made things worse? Because here's what the numbers say. Since Africom was established, terrorism in Africa hasn't declined. It's exploded. At that time, the global presence of terrorism on African continent was 2%. Today, that number is 43%. Let that sink in. In the Sahel, attacks have multiplied, driving millions from their homes. In Nigeria, Boko Haram continues to terrorize civilians. In Somalia, Al-Shabaab remains just as deadly, despite years of drone strikes and U.S. support. And now, we're seeing new insurgencies pop up in places like Mozambique and the DRC. More troops, more drones, more bases. So, why more terrorism? So if Africom was supposed to be the answer, why does the problem keep getting worse? Critics say Africom militarized Africa's problems instead of solving them. Many African scholars, civil society groups, and even some political leaders argue that Africom missed the point. Instead of addressing the root causes of insecurity, like poverty, weak governance, and inequality, it prioritized counterterrorism over community building, drone strikes over diplomacy, military solutions over political reforms. And while the U.S. framed Africom as a partnership, in practice, it often looked like top-down control. The command isn't even based in Africa, it's in Germany. Decisions are often made in Washington, not in Addis Ababa or Abuja. And funding often goes to training militaries, not strengthening civil institutions. The result? Well, you have more weapons, more surveillance, but not more peace. And then, let's not forget the optics. Is this security or neocolonialism? Let's not ignore how AFRICOM looks, especially in a post-colonial context. You have the world's biggest military power establishing outposts across the continent, backing regimes that don't always serve their people, while extracting intel and influence. For many Africans, it feels less like protection and more like control. And that's why you've seen growing resistance from countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, who've kicked out French and Western troops. South Africa, which has long been skeptical of AFRICOM's motives, and even civil society movements who demand more African-led solutions. So when Trump talks about shutting down AFRICOM, some say, good. It's time for it to go. But as we'll see next, it's not that simple. Because removing a flawed system without replacing it could create chaos. If AFRICOM goes, is that liberation or vulnerability? Let's break down the pros and cons of AFRICOM's potential shutdown.
To match military requirements. Now, as I've said in previous testimony, Africa remains a nexus theater from which the United States cannot shift its gaze. It is home to terrorists who take advantage of conditions in Africa to grow and export their ideology. ISIS controls their global network from Somalia. It is where the Chinese Communist Party actively works to change the international rules-based order as a stepping stone to become the global hegemon. And it's where the Russian Federation.
If the U.S. actually follows through with shutting down or gutting AFRICOM, what are the real upsides and downsides? Because depending on who you ask, this move is either the start of a freer Africa or the beginning of even more instability. Let's start with the potential benefits. 1, a step toward true sovereignty. Let's be honest, many African countries have never been fully in control of their own security strategies. Shutting down AFRICOM could finally force a shift toward homegrown, African-led solutions, like the ones we've been talking about here on the breakdown, instead of outsourcing everything to Washington. And number 2, less militarization, more investment in people. Without AFRICOM, governments might refocus resources on education, infrastructure, governance, and public health, the real foundations of long-term peace. Militarized aid hasn't solved the problem. Maybe it's time to invest in root causes. And number 3, a chance to build an African security architecture. Yes, the end of AFRICOM could be the push Africa needs to fully activate forces like the African Union Standby Force, regional coalitions like ECOWAS, SADC, and the new Alliance of Sahel States, and a more coordinated approach to continental defense and intelligence.
As a posture-limited theater, AFRICOM, we establish strength and work towards peace by enhancing the security capabilities of our African partners through a robust system of alliances, exercises, training events, security cooperation, and foreign military sales programs are the backbone of our military activities on the continent. Through these activities, our forces lead by example with a warrior ethos.
Let's look at the case against AFRICOM shutting down. 1, security vacuum, right? Terror surge. Let's not kid ourselves. Groups like Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram, and ISIS affiliates are still active and waiting for gaps to exploit. So if AFRICOM pulls out without a clear replacement strategy, fragile regions could collapse into chaos. Secondly, opening the door to foreign adversaries. Africa may have problems, but Russia and China won't come with fewer strings. A vacuum in U.S. presence could allow Moscow and Beijing to deepen military, intelligence, and resource extraction deals with little concern for democracy or human rights. Thirdly, the loss of critical capabilities. AFRICOM doesn't just bring soldiers, it brings satellite surveillance, air support and logistics, counterterrorism intelligence, disaster relief. Most African militaries can't replicate these capabilities overnight. So what's the real risk? The danger isn't just AFRICOM leaving. The danger is AFRICOM leaving with no plan, no transition, and no accountability, leaving African nations to scramble for support wherever they can get. And let's be honest, if Africa doesn't shape what comes next, someone else will.
Liberate a region, you have to have a credible holding force there so stabilization activities and efforts can initiate and in turn the populace and faith in the federal government of Somalia with the services they provide. So that's a very fragile period. And if they can't sustain that because they're moving to the next region or next district, it ebbs.
So that was what was happening.
Yes,
in
that's
this
what you're seeing.
instance.
You're seeing ebbing and flowing.
They couldn't hold the territory that they had gained.
Right.
And that's where your training is coming in to try to get them ready and sped up to be able to hold that territory.
Exactly. It takes time. It's an investment to build an army.
So even with that assessment, with the struggles in the central Somalia region, even with ATMOS moving out and a new force yet to be determined moving in,
yes,
you have still said that you are, quote, cautiously optimistic that Somali forces will be successful against al-Shabaab.
Well, we are at an inflection point. This is unknown territory, how they're going to navigate this transition. Yes, we need a credible holding force. However, when I say I'm cautiously optimistic, I'm looking at the whole of government effort. Every time I go there, stabilization activities are increasing. Activities that USAID has put forth in their efforts of working with civil society organizations to hit those benchmarks of stability.
So the real question isn't just should AFRICOM shut down? The real question is, what does Africa need to build in its place? So let's be real. If AFRICOM leaves or gets absorbed into a broader command, it can't just be the end of something. It has to be the beginning of something better. Because if the U.S. steps back and Africa does nothing, the power vacuum will get filled with whoever is fastest, richest, or more ruthless. So the real challenge isn't just stopping AFRICOM. It's building a new African security architecture that actually works for the people, not just the politicians. So what does that look like? One, a fully operational African Union security force. The African Standby Force has been talked about for years, but talk isn't enough. Africa needs a continental-wide rapid response military, trained, equipped, and ready to respond to threats without begging for Western intervention. It's time to move from blueprints to battalions. Two, stronger regional blocs with teeth. Whether it's ECOWAS or SADC or EAC or the new Alliance of Sahel states, regional groups must step up. That means pooling resources, sharing intelligence, creating unified command structures, and most importantly, acting decisively when a crisis breaks out. No more waiting on Washington. Number three, a continental intelligence network. You can't fight modern threats with Cold War tactics. Africa needs its own intelligence sharing platform, focusing on terrorism, cybersecurity, arms trafficking, foreign mercenary operations. It's time for Africa to have eyes and ears that don't depend on the CIA or NSA. Number 4, local security that is rooted in communities. We also need to move beyond state-to-state militarism. Community-based security, conflict mediation, and investment in youth employment must be part of the solution. Because the best defense against terrorism isn't always more guns. It's fewer reasons for young people to pick them up. And number 5, Pan-African defense industries. Why is Africa still importing almost all of its defense equipment? From drones to bulletproof vests, uniforms to surveillance tech, Africa must start manufacturing its own security tools, keeping jobs and data in the continent. That means investing in defense R&D, research and development, partnering with local universities, and building a continental defense market. So no, Africa doesn't need another Africom. What it needs is a bold, coordinated Pan-African vision for security, rooted in sovereignty, powered by collaboration, and driven by the needs of its people. The exit of Africom could be a setback, or the moment Africa starts writing its own security doctrine. So my people, where do we go from here? The United States is reportedly preparing to shut down Africom, the most visible symbol of American military power on African soil. And while some see that as a threat, others see it as a chance for Africa to finally say, our security is not for sale, our strategy is not outsourced, and our future will not be negotiated in someone else's war room. But that only works if we're ready to build. Because if Africom goes and Africa stands still, the power vacuum will get filled. Not by peace, not by unity, but by the same old games, just with new players at the table. So the question isn't just, should Africom go? The question is, what will rise in its place? Will Africa invest in its own forces? Will regional blocs work like they were meant to? Will we choose sovereignty over short-term aid, unity over division, vision over dependence? This moment is not about America. This moment is about Africa. And whether we're ready to lead our own defense or continue being the battleground in someone else's empire. So let me know in the comments, should Africom be shut down? Is Africa ready to protect and lead itself? And what would a truly Pan-African military and security system look like? Let me know in the comments. I can't wait to hear your thoughts. That's it for today's show. If this episode opened your eyes, don't just scroll past it. Hit that like button, subscribe, share this, and join our membership community where we go deeper beyond the headlines. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Sandra Babu-Boateng. Until next time, take care. Hey you! Thanks so much for watching this episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, don't forget to subscribe and join the family. Also, visit face2faceafrica.com for your daily news and updates on what's going on within the global Black community so you can stay informed.